The death toll from the latest wave of explosions targeting Hezbollah and its communications devices in Lebanon has risen to 25. The walkie-talkie bombs come the day after a dozen people were killed when pagers used by the militant group exploded almost simultaneously. Israel isn't commenting on the blasts, but its Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, says a new phase in the war has begun. Considered a terrorist group by many countries, Hezbollah vows to retaliate.
Panic on the streets after a device explodes at a Hezbollah fighter funeral in southern Lebanon. It was just one of many across the country. Some at funerals, others at electronics stores.
I didn't expect what happened today. Things are repeating all over again. We had some devices here that we believed were 100% safe, but out of caution we removed them from the store because we got worried.
The blasts on Wednesday that targeted walkie-talkies came a day after pagers used by Hezbollah exploded across Lebanon and Syria, killing at least 12. Thousands were injured, including many bystanders.
The use of this non-discriminatory force or attacks, which clearly will affect civilians, is something, in my mind, is something against international humanitarian law.
The explosions have left people across Lebanon in shock, with many now afraid to use any electronic devices.
Who can feel safe in this situation? We've had 5,000 people injured in just 2 days. This isn't a small matter, it's a war. Who can even trust their phone now? When I heard what happened yesterday, I left my phone on my motorcycle and I walked away.
Hezbollah blames Israel for the attacks. Many of its members have been using pagers and similar low-tech devices to avoid Israeli surveillance. Israel hasn't commented on the blast directly, but its defense minister sent Hezbollah a clear message.
First of all, the center of gravity is moving north. This means we're shifting resources, forces, and energy in that direction. We haven't forgotten the hostages, and we haven't forgotten our goals in the south. It's our duty, and we're addressing both in tandem. This action involves all agencies, with a clear and simple goal: to return the residents of the northern communities to their homes safely.
And in the early hours of Thursday, Israel struck what it says were Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon. All signs that point towards a new tipping point for the region that risks an all-out war.
Mohamad Shreyteh is in Beirut for us, Tania Krämer in Jerusalem. Mohamad, how worried are people about what's going on?
Well, there's a general feeling of disturbance and anxiety due to the waves of device explosions over the last 2 days here in Beirut. We've been hearing growing concerns from people about the use of their personal tablets and mobile phones. Many have been disconnecting their solar system Wi-Fi out of fear that a possible attack or a cyber attack would blow up their batteries. And on another aspect of the life disturbance here in Lebanon, the Lebanese Civil Aviation Authority banned transport of pagers and walkie-talkies on flights until further notice. Also, the Lebanese army issued a statement this morning, actually a while ago, warning citizens to stay away from suspicious pagers across the country that army experts are locally detonating. So you see the repercussions of these events are still really ongoing, with questions raised about how will these latest developments change the dynamics of this almost year-old confrontation between Hezbollah and Israel.
And talking about dynamics, Tania, we just heard from the defense minister in Israel signaling a new phase in the war. What's he getting at there?
Well, I mean, Israel has been preparing, for a month in this almost year-long confrontations, these cross-border attacks between southern Lebanon and the north of Israel there for a wider escalation. But what does Yoav Gallant means by that is what he said, shifting resources from the war in Gaza from the south to the north. And we understand this is mostly reflected in troops that are being redeployed. For example, the 98th Division that was mainly deployed in Gaza is now being shifted to the northern border, joining another division that has been operating there. There have been drills, there have been exercises in recent weeks, but also in recent days. And also there has been a limited call-up of reserve to serve in the north. Now, all of this, of course, while the government has also redefined its war goals, saying, as we heard the defense minister saying there, that they want to make sure that northern residents in northern Israel, those who have been evacuated almost a year ago, can at some point go back to their homes. And of course, all this happens while we're also seeing again today and last night, the Israeli army has put out a statement this morning. They have been attacking southern Lebanon, and there have been also drone attacks today, over the course of the day, in northern Israel, which caused fires and also some injuries here in northern Israel.
So, Mohamad, what sort of response are we going to get from Hezbollah's leadership later today?
Well, Hezbollah is using deterrence and will have to do something about it. We know that Hezbollah's chief Hassan Nasrallah will be addressing his supporters this afternoon. We expect him to raise the roof. We expect a fiery speech today using strong and loud tone, given the scale of the hit that Hezbollah took. We expect Nasrallah to announce a retaliation that satisfies the group supporters and restore the morals of its members and backers. There's no doubt that the latest event took this confrontation to a new level. The question is whether is it still below the all-out war level. It is clear that Hezbollah has no intentions and no plans to draw back from this confrontation, as we see that the militant group is still sending drones and rockets towards the north of Israel in support of Gaza, as it indicated in media statements this morning claiming the attacks.
And this has been going on since October 7. Tania, what can we expect from Israel next?
Well, I mean, it's too early to say, but I mean, people here, ordinary citizens, have almost the same thoughts. They are looking very closely, watching very closely what are the next moves, what Hassan Nasrallah will say in his speech, but also what will be the next move of the government here, the Israeli military. There has been a lot of speculation about these attacks in Lebanon in the past 2 days, whether, this was an opening for the intelligence to attack, although Israel has not officially claimed those attacks, but also if this is a wider war strategy. There's also speculation about Israel making a preemptive strike or, for example, launching a ground offensive. So it is still to see what will happen next year, whether we have been in this situation before, also just some weeks ago when there were targeted assassinations in Beirut, in Tehran. Iran at the time has also vowed to retaliate. They haven't done so yet. So it's a question whether, both sides here can take a step back and prevent an all-out war.
Let's hope so. We'll be waiting and watching. Tania Krämer with the analysis there from Jerusalem, and Mohamad Shreyteh in Beirut. In the wake of the blasts, United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warned of a serious risk of dramatic escalation in Lebanon. He's also raised concern about the nature of the attack on Hezbollah's communications devices.
I think it's very important that there is an effective control of civilian objects, not to weaponize civilian objects. That should be a rule that everywhere in the world governments should be able to implement.
Janina Dill is a co-director of the Oxford Institute for Ethics, Law and Armed Conflict. Weaponizing an object used by civilians is strictly prohibited under international law. From a legal perspective, does it matter that those who appear to have been targeted are suspected Hezbollah operatives?
Yes, distinction requires that each attack in war here, each explosion of a device, is directed against an individual that the attacker knows or reasonably believes to be a legitimate target of attack. So Hezbollah fighters are legitimate targets of attacks, but crucially, not every member of Hezbollah is, only the fighting wing or members of its armed group. Even if these attacks were all intended to target Hezbollah fighters, the question from a legal point of view would still arise whether the attacking party, potentially Israel, had the means or intelligence to verify that the pages would actually land in the hands of the intended individuals, so Hezbollah fighters. Did Israel take any precautions, for instance, to ensure that the pages would be in the hands of fighters rather than civilians?
You're an expert on law and morality and war. What was your first thought when you heard about these attacks?
Well, placing a small explosive device directly on the body of a fighter in some sense is the ideal of an attack from the point of international law. Committing hundreds of those attacks simultaneously at the same time, on the other hand, is almost impossible to reconcile with international law. So we can imagine that Israel had intelligence that these pages were destined for the fighting wing of Hezbollah. So in that case, we may imagine that it complied with distinction. But there are additional considerations here. For instance, the principle of precautions demands that for each explosion, the anticipated civilian harm would be minimized as much as possible, for instance, through the timing of attack. This is obviously very difficult to achieve when many attacks must go off simultaneously. Attackers must also conduct a proportionality calculation for each of these explosions, and if they don't have intelligence where the pages would be at the time of explosion, that would be very hard to achieve.
OK, just explain to me then what the difference is between a whole lot of smaller bombs going off, killing possibly hundreds or thousands of people, and one big bomb going off and killing perhaps hundreds of people.
Well, the question is whether the attacker retains control over the timing, the place, and the circumstances of the attack, and whether there's intelligence to, with this information, minimize the anticipated civilian harm. Right? With one big bomb going off, you presumably have some advanced intelligence about the civilians surrounding the explosion, and through the timing, the angle of the attack, you can minimize that expected civilian harm. You can also weigh this expected civilian harm, or we sometimes call it collateral damage, to the anticipated military advantage. But with hundreds of similar small bombs going off at the same time, the attacker wouldn't know in advance whether there would be civilians surrounding these attacks, how the timing should be, when the attacks should go off in order to minimize civilian harm. And there would be very little intelligence that is required to actually conduct a meaningful proportionality calculation.
Well, in this case, I can tell you these bombs didn't go off in a war zone. They went off in public places.
Yes, I mean, there's currently an armed conflict between Hezbollah and Israel, so international law of war applies. But it is absolutely correct that most of these pages, or many of these pages, would have gone off in the midst of civilian areas. And since it wasn't possible for the attacker to anticipate the civilian harm, a meaningful proportionality calculation wouldn't have been possible, which is why this operation poses very, very serious challenges under international law.
And the UN has called for an independent investigation into the explosions. What could that investigation actually reveal, as a last question?
Well, many facts that are relevant for a legal analysis and that may be relevant politically, including the attributability of this operation to Israel, are still unclear. Surfacing these facts in a way that is credible is certainly legally and politically relevant. I think one potential political consequence that should come from this is that states awaken to the really operational danger of an overly permissive application of international law to personal communication devices in the context of war. Given how much terror this operation must have caused the civilian population in Lebanon, it will be really critical to clarify and strengthen states' commitment to their existing legal obligations and to clarify how exactly they apply in this particular context.
Janina Dill there from the Oxford Institute for Ethics, Law and Armed Conflict. Thanks for being on DW News.
Thank you.